All right, so I wanted to get started. We all know that Donald Trump has been proposing to build a wall at the U.S.-Mexican border. He wants to deport 11 million undocumented immigrants and has basically called Mexican immigrants criminals. Yet he's leading in the polls and in the primaries. Other Republican nominee hopefuls are also talking very tough on immigration. How can you sisters help change the tenor of the immigration debate in this country?
I think we have to take every avenue, every opportunity to be a voice for the voiceless, whether that's letters to the editor, taking opportunities to speak in our parishes, our schools, civic groups. I'm fond of quoting Catherine of Siena, who said, "Speak as if you have a million voices. It's silence that kills the world."
I think that we can also make big present the immigrants themselves, their faces, their stories, so that people can know that they are not criminals, that there are people like you and I, and that they deserve dignity and respect from all of us.
The other thing that I think we all do well is that we benefit from partnerships with a lot of other coalitions in the state across this country. And I think we have the capacity to build on those networks to build a momentum.
And one other piece would be to change the issue from a legal issue to a faith and a moral issue. That is our responsibility as Christians to welcome the stranger.
We have had an enforcement-only policy throughout the Obama administration, and we have had a wall for 10 years now, and we need to look at the root causes of immigration. Why are people coming? You do not leave your home, as the Russian poet says, unless your home is in the mouth of a snake. So we need to build a bridge, not a wall, and to look at our world situation. How do we as U.S. Americans participate in the push factors, and how do we use our resources to welcome the people who live on the same planet as we do, as one family?
We've talked a lot about stories this week, and one of the benefits of being a sister and being a part of this network is that we know people who are working on the ground with immigrants all across the country. And a phrase that came to me yesterday is faces, not fences. We know the faces of these people, and we need to lift those up when we start talking about fences.
All right, great. This is good. This is good. A good discussion. Thank you. Anyone else? All right, before we move on, again, this is a little bit informal, but thank you. I appreciate that. There also appears to be a disconnect among many Catholics between Catholic social justice teaching on immigration and their views. Somewhat related to the first question, but perhaps a little more detailed, what are your suggestions for addressing this disconnect? And can you share any approaches that you've tried?
Well, I think that people refer to the Catholic social teaching as the church's best kept secret. And I question why. How can we bring Catholic social teaching in our classrooms, in our parishes, and give that opportunity, take every opportunity to speak as we see it individually, as we see it corporately, to connect the two. But there is a great gap in education among people in the pews regarding Catholic social teaching. I think we each have to creatively come up with ways of putting that out there, as we do about learning, scripture study.
Some of the basic principles of Catholic social teaching are, number one, the right to migrate, but also the right not to have to migrate, to be able to stay in your own home. And another principle is the right for countries to make their own laws, but that must be done in the context of the human family, not only what serves our immediate country, but what serves the universal common good. Again, looking at it with a worldwide perspective in our globalized world, and to see what is our obligation. At this point in history, we've never figured out immigration laws that work. We've been at this for almost 200 years. And it changes like the wind in Chicago, where I'm from, And It's always a challenge. What are the needs? Look at the families we have now where there are U.S. citizen members, there are people with documents, there are undocumented people because they're 22 years old and fell out of the line that they've been standing in for 20 years. So it's like tuning up your car, and putting on a new set of wheels and getting it forward to accomplish the job we need to do to get everybody in the car, on the bus, whatever.
And another thing I think we just need to acknowledge that we are a nation of immigrants, and I think we tend to forget that. So how can we get people to begin to get in touch with their own stories in their own families, that we are all immigrants and that we all, at one time, our families had an opportunity in this country, and shouldn't everyone be allowed the same opportunity?
And to add on to that, our communities we're immigrant communities too. They came from other places to serve the local immigrants that were coming to this country. So we are immigrant people also. I wanted to add one other thing about one of the programs that Arise offers in South Texas is a Border Witness program. And they bring a variety of people, groups of sisters, groups of students, college students on spring break, to come down and experience the border personally, and to see what it is, to see the wall, to meet people who have come across, who are living in limbo, like the other people have talked about, without the laws there that will help them to become citizens, and they want to become citizens. They want to add their gifts to this country. They're not taking away from this country, they will add to this country. And meeting the people firsthand is really a good way to do that.
I would like to add to what Rose just said, is that having people come and see and experience what is happening, for them to see the moms, the children, and be part of that reality, it transforms them. It brings the Catholic social teachings to life and understand more vividly their responsibility to be part of helping others, and that responsibility we have to help all people.
Mm-hmm. Two things come to mind for me. One, the golden rule, and two, family values. Just thinking about if we ourselves were raising our children in these Central American countries where violence is a fear every day, if we can look at it from that perspective, what would we want other countries to do if we were in that position? And we say that as a Christian nation, family values are important to us, and if we can decriminalize the issue and show the families at the center that really being for immigration reform is being for family values, that's a really important way to reframe the debate.
I think so, and share the stories of immigrants who've touched us. People are not so much moved by statistics. We can quote statistics, but I think the real touching stories will be more convincing, especially stories around children who are coming. And I think most of those coming to the United States are children. I think we can also frame this as a pro-life issue. It is a seamless garment.
Mm-hmm. I think we need to be as vocal about our perspective and our position around this issue as the opposite perspective is. They are very good at getting their message across, and it seems like the general public doesn't have a balanced source of information. So if we can do that, where we are putting the human side, the human face on the issue, and calling people to look at the issue through their faith rather than through political rhetoric, I think that would go a long way in connecting people to the heart of the issue.
All right. Thank you. Good responses. It's going to be a wonderful article. I appreciate it. The immigration system is often described as broken. What reforms would you like to see, and which are the most pressing?
Well, I would like to say that many of the families that come to the border, that we are seeing at the border, are families that go through a lot of suffering, and a lot of it should not happen if there was a better immigration process for them to come to our country and avoid all the criminalization and people taking advantage of them. So I would think that a very present is a better process for people to leave their country in a safer way.
I think one of the most pressing issues is DACA. There's a young man named Alfredo in Cincinnati who is a dreamer, and he lives in constant fear that he's going to come home from college and his father is not going to be there anymore. So really focusing on that issue as allowing the parents of children who are here to be able to stay here. Again, supporting keeping families together.
Yeah, and a legal way for them to be present in this country and to work without being vilified as a criminal, recognizing that they contribute to our economics in many, many ways, and that we would be in a lot of trouble if all 11 million of them were really rounded up and taken out of the country. We depend on them. They are part of our communities, part of our economic system, and yet we don't give them a way to do that legally. So changing that so that that they can be present even if they're just here to work.
Another thing that can be changed is activating Congress to do their job. It has always been a question, are immigration laws federal or are they local? And at the moment they're federal with a lot of interference on the sidelines. However, Congress sets the number of people who can come to the United States. They can increase those numbers. You know, you can buy a 1-gallon tank or a 10-gallon tank. Congress can do that. One of the examples of the broken immigration system was the 1986 amnesty law, where there were no derivatives, which meant if I applied for permanent residence status, I couldn't bring my spouse and my children. So mom or dad became a permanent resident, and then they filed a petition, and they would wait 10 to 15 years. There's a family that I worked with in Chicago where the dad became a permanent resident, and because he was here at the required time, and mom and the kids came over here. He filed a petition for them. They waited 15 years for that. 5 years ago, the numbers became available. We were able to get them all to their immigration interviews. They got their green cards. And the youngest child, who's the only girl in the family, went all through grade school, kindergarten, grade school, and high school today. And she is now in a STEM program at an East Coast university and wants to be a biomedical technician. And she's now 5 years a permanent resident and is in the process of becoming a citizen. So, you know, these are the people who stood in line, and there are so many more of them. And they can just open the door a little bit further and let these people get their papers right, where they've been waiting 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, depending upon where you're from.
Yeah. I think the whole timeline is daunting.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's totally unrealistic, and most people don't know that. I even question who our representatives and our senators know that. That is something that seems that could be changed and changed quickly. The other thing I think is we need to do some myth busting. Yeah. There's so many myths surrounding immigrants. They don't pay taxes, high crime, many, many others. And as long as they're not addressed consistently, they're going to persist. Mm-hmm. So I think we really need to be occupying our time with dealing with the myths. Mm-hmm.
One of the ones when you say that comes to my mind is people, you know, a lot of people will say, my parents or my grandparents, you know, were immigrants, but they did it the right way. They did it the legal way. And why should these people not have to follow the same rules? Not knowing that the rules are completely different. There isn't a way for them to do it legally anymore. And then, you know, talking about the student, why would we educate young people to that degree and then export them? You know, it does not serve our own interests either. That they're valuable members of our communities and part of our viable future.
I would also add the importance of defining a refugee from an immigrant. I think that's not very clear and not up to date with what we are experiencing today with all the immigrants that are coming, but that are truly refugees and are not considered refugees.
And the United States is part of the international community in terms of the 1980 Refugee Act, where there are international standards and due process procedures for people to follow. And with the current deterrence program of the administration, where people are locked up in jail, women and children under the age of 18 are held in 3 family detention centers in Berks County, Pennsylvania, Daly, Texas, and Karnes, Texas, which is in violation of our U.S. American laws and an international law. And the access to counsel is a prime issue on that.
And just also to that same thing is that when an immigrant arrives and is detained for the very first time at a processing center, the very first person they are apprehended and to determine whether their status is a Border Patrol agent that probably does not have any skills or anything to know how to respond to determine whether this person is truly has the right to be here in this country and why they're fleeing from their country. So to address that, it's very important to have a better representation of who is the one that interviews that immigrant for the very first time.
I think we need to continue to raise awareness about what's really going on in the countries where these people are coming from. I was in Guatemala 2 summers ago when there was a large influx of women and children from Central America. And one of the mothers I talked to, Maria, had just seen a son of hers, his classmate, was killed in the plaza in their village in Guatemala that same week. So she was sharing with me that she understands why some of the mothers in her community were sending their children to America. So just to keep in mind that reality, if we can really soak that in and really see what that means for a mother, I think it changes our perspective.
And also to acknowledge, I think, going with that is the number of immigrants that are here and are really complementing the American workforce in so many industries. And I don't think people see that. And I think that's really important to acknowledge.
Well, thank you. You've actually done segue nicely into a question. I'm going to skip further down and then come back. Sister Norma, you mentioned specifically about refugees. I'm going to skip to a question I had further down on my list and come back to that. The Obama administration, basically they've taken this idea of family detention as a deterrent for Central American refugees. There are advocates who say that they should be treated as refugees and granted temporary protected status. Let's explore that a little more deeply. Why take that view? There's violence in lots of countries. I'm going to take an adversarial view here. Why treat them as special?
I don't know that we're necessarily treating them special. We're treating them with the human dignity that any person deserves to be treated, and so we should always take that into consideration when we treat anybody, and how we make sure that they have due process and that they have the right treatment as human beings deserve. I think it's something that we should do to everyone.
I also think it's an obvious Good Samaritan moment. They're here. They're our neighbors. They're present. So we have to look at them and decide how we're going to respond. They're not somewhere across the globe. They are here.
And our laws and our procedures allow them to tell their story to the immigration officials or to the immigration judge so they can obtain refugee status. It's really political asylum. Refugees technically are approved before they leave their own country, and that's a 2 to 3 year process. But what we are talking about are people seeking asylum. It's like your neighbor knocking on their door saying, "My house is on fire, let me in." Well, do you ask for their identification or do you welcome them in? How do we respond to this as human beings? And in terms of the volume of people who are coming, we don't have to lock them up and pay $350 per person per day for women and children. Look at the money, what we could do with that money in terms of human needs and resources. Part of the immigration law is temporary protected status. Most recently, it happens for political reasons, like people from Somalia, the Haitian earthquake, for physical disorders, or a temporary disruption. So if the administration and the Congress would allow for temporary protected status for persons from the Northern Triangle, this would alleviate the whole family detention problem, get the people settled in legal status. It's not a permanent residence status or citizenship, that they can live and work and provide for their families. And when conditions change, they have the right to go home and would have that opportunity to do so. They could also apply for asylum if they want to, but it would alleviate the current crunch. Because, going back to the earlier question about enforcement, with the administration's policy of enforcement only, the administration has not put out the resources to get people through the administrative or the court process. So there's a tremendous log jam and people bringing their cases to conclusion. Immigration court cases are 3 to 5 years out at this point.
And another reason we really need to look at the whole situation is that American policies and politics have had a lot to do with the conditions that are pushing these people out of their countries. It's not a popular thing to look at or to talk about, but we need to own our own responsibility, our own culpability in the situation that's been created. So we helped create this problem. We are responsible for helping find some solutions.
Another thing people always say is they're all coming here au contraire. The countries surrounding the Northern Triangle, Mexico, Costa Rica, their asylum applications have increased more than 1,000-fold, and ours have only gone up 300%. The same with the Syrian refugees. The small neighboring countries to Iraq and Syria have taken in tens and hundreds of thousands of refugees, and we're saying we will take 10,000. Yeah. How does that balance on our scale of life?
We want to be sort of merciful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or when it benefits us.
Kind of returning to the detention issue, specifically the women and children, I'm wondering about the move by the state of Texas and the private prison corporation to become licensed as, I believe it's child care providers. I'd like to hear what's going on in that area and what you think about that.
I would like to say to that the conditions that these centers that they have for detention for the families are really, truly concentration camps. You know, when you experience that and see that, and you see the families, the moms with their children, and the children depressed and not wanting to eat, and it's really not a wise choice to have families in those conditions, you know, or even children, and for that matter, when they're just initially apprehended and put in those processing centers for a while. The conditions are terrible for those children, and so I think that the United States should have a better option than that to respond for these families.
It is my understanding that the requests for licensing as child care agencies have all been denied. Some of them are on appeal. And the Family Detention Center in Berks County, Pennsylvania, has lost its license even as a detention facility. But that's under appeal, so there are still about 92 women and children detained there. So it's one big mess. And the whole point of asking to become a child care facility was to keep the money in the pipeline so they can keep doing this. The capacity at Dilley is 2,400. Carnes upped its capacity from a 500-bed facility to 680, and last I heard there were about 380 women and children still detained in Carnes. Now, remember, there are other detention centers in every state and every county practically for men and women and unaccompanied minors as well. So we're talking about a very small portion, but the family detention is an abomination, truly.
There's a woman named Irma who came from Dilley on her way to Cincinnati, and she has a 2-year-old daughter, and she described the room that she stayed in as a freezer. She said that if you could imagine women and children laying on mats all across the floor with a very thin sheet over them trying to sleep, her daughter crying, that was the experience that she had at Dilley. It was far from a child care facility.
And why should corporations be lining their pockets on the backs of people who are poor?
the Corrections Corporations of America posted their highest earnings last year on this. So, and also GEO, which is now the ankle monitor program that the Immigration Service is pushing onto people as an alternative to detention, which again is a big moneymaker for the private prison corporations and just a terrible, horrific situation for the people who are subject to them.
It's considered a quick fix, and we don't know what does that bode for the future in terms of mental health for mothers, for children. When we treat them in this inhumane way, we are setting the stage for future problems just by this one action.
And I think it goes back to what was said earlier when we spoke about the social justice teachings of the church and preserving the human dignity of all. And in fact, this is the least human dignity that you could give to someone.
Not only is it, not a quick fix, but it's a moneymaker. People are strategically profiting off of this. And I think these huge detention centers are out in the middle of nowhere for a good reason, because if most people, if they saw the conditions and what these people are going through, would not support it or tolerate it.
And makes it more difficult for them to have legal representation and due process.
Yeah.
You want to speak a little bit more to the issue of legal representation and how that has affected the people who are applying for asylum?
Under the immigration laws, people are entitled to counsel, but unlike in the criminal context, you are not entitled to counsel at government expense. If you can pay for an attorney, or if you can get a pro bono attorney, you can have a representative. Statistics have shown that people who are represented have like about a 98% chance of prevailing on the merits. But because of the lack of access to counsel and the lack of people trained in asylum law, many of these people are unrepresented. A year ago, this month, in March of 2015, the Cara Pro Bono Project was started by CLINIC, the Catholic Legal Immigration Network, AILA, the American Immigration Lawyers Association, Berenices, which is a local NGO, non-governmental organization in San Antonio, Texas, and the American Immigration Council. And thousands of volunteer attorneys have gone down to represent people. Many other workers and students have volunteered to help them. And this has been a wonderful, hopeful, bringing the face of the people. Cara means face. And when we are face to face with people, you see their suffering. In my 30 years of practice, I never did an asylum case until I went to Philly. And I said, I don't need to go there. And they said, Bernadine, you're retired, you go. Like, not me, Lord, that's somebody else that can do it. But, once you're there and you put your mind to it and you are so captured, and I had never seen so much trauma in the lives of immigrants as I did in Philly. The 20-year-old young woman with her 3-year-old daughter, the mom with her 2 teenage sons who didn't speak Spanish. People who are very kind, and we go through the interview and they give me their package of cookies from their lunch to say thank you. They are so grateful. So anybody who speaks Spanish, there's an Amazon website if you want to participate. Go to Cara Pro Bono Project if you want to donate paper clips or paper or ink, whatever. It's all pro bono. Ayla and Clinic have raised funds to get the attorneys. But the community of workers down there is just tremendous, and they're from all over the country. And law students are going down there, and retired people and active attorneys. And we go on our own dime. Nobody pays for us. So that's, again, using our resources to help those who are in greatest need. Being in jail for 3 weeks was a new experience.
You might be able to answer this too, but I know in January when there were immigration raids in 3 of our southern states, these people were slated to be deported, but because of the CARA project, representing some of them, looking at their cases, they found that they had not been afforded due process and they were allowed to stay.
Right.
So there's some hope there that when people get involved here, we can change things.
And now that people are released from jail, there's a big move to get people through the pipeline and to get pro bono representation in Los Angeles, Chicago, Atlanta, Philadelphia, wherever they may be as they move through the next 3 to 5 years on that. So we're definitely going uphill, but we can do it.
You had also mentioned earlier alternatives to detention of women and children. Can you tell us, there are these programs that are run by sisters around the country. They're generally less expensive, as you've noted, than keeping people locked up in these facilities. Can you tell us a little bit more of some examples of these? Are there plans to expand them? That's the first set of questions. The second set of questions is, what's being done to educate lawmakers that these programs exist, that these alternatives exist?
You know, many of us have served immigrant women and children for many, many, many years. For instance, I can give an example in my congregation. We have a sponsored ministry called the Learning Connection, and we provide GED prep. Some of these immigrants need very basic literacy skills, and we've seen thousands of women go through this program and become very productive in our local community. And I know this is mirrored across the country in many religious congregations where we've been running programs like this for years. And so certainly the more support, the more resources that can be put into those kinds of efforts, we could do tremendous, tremendous things. And they are already happening.
In Chicago, there are houses of hospitality, Marie Joseph House of Hospitality, one for men and one for women, that was founded by a group called the Interfaith Committee for Detained Immigrants. Marie Joseph was a Haitian immigrant who was locked up by INS and was let out, and she had nowhere to go, and she went to an abandoned building and died of exposure 3 days later. So upon the discovery of her body, an interfaith group gathered together to say, what can we do for this situation? These have been going, well, once we got through all the zoning and all that good stuff, they've been in operation for a little less than 2 years. One is for women and children, and especially women with families. There's one family at the detention center, I was there last Saturday, where there's a teenage son, a girl in 5th grade, a 4-year-old, and an 8-month-old boy. And the baby boy was born while the mom was in Chicago. Another Somali woman delivered her baby 4 months ago. So to have pregnant women be able to be in more of a family setting is certainly on the plus side. The other house is in the suburbs, and that is for men. And depending upon where they are in the process, they're able to work, and then they move out and other people come in. But I just want to say, underneath all of this, there is no need to detain them. We do not need family detention. That is the administration's deterrent. The government has the right to lock people up, but not forever. And they can let people out on their own recognizance, meaning, you know, here's your paper, you need to present this to the judge in Chicago or, you know, Kansas City, wherever you're going to live with your cousin George, and follow up on that. Other people, and for decades, people have paid a bond to assure their return to court. And if people are serious about their claim, they'll show up and they'll tell their story to the judge, and they will pursue their rights. And bonds, right now, the minimum is $1,500, but we've heard bonds in these cases up to $20,000, which is totally ridiculous, with people who have the shirt on their back and all their money is gone. There's the ankle monitor situation, which has used in the criminal context, but these people are not criminals. So bottom line is, we don't need family detention.
I think the other thing that's important to know is that families that are on the border, and probably in other places besides the border, are willing to help people who are coming across even at their own expense. Their own expense financially, but also their own expense legally, because they might not have their papers either, but they're willing to bring people to their homes to stay with them instead of having them in detention centers or as they come across without being caught by INS, but they're willing to help because it's a justice issue, it's a moral issue, and it's about the dignity of the individual and the family. It's not about laws.
Yeah. And going back to your question about educating legislators, before I came to Washington, we had a congressional breakfast in Chicago with the ALA Advocacy Committee, and many of the staff people there did not know the details of the conditions in Dilley, Texas, and the ALA, the icebox, and the dog cage, the parado, where they lock up a mom in one cage and the child in another cage, and the child is crying and the mother cannot console her child. And why? So they can say, don't come because they're not nice when you get to the U.S. border. And the people who got to the U.S. border have already survived coming across the Mexico southern border, which the American government has spent a lot of money to pay to keep people away from our border. So going back to the issue we mentioned before, that we are part of the problem here. And, like in Illinois, we started selling Illinois corn to the Mexican farmers 20 years ago under NAFTA, killing the culture, the subsistence farming. So it's against the fabric of life, the economics, the politics, the international trade, everything else. So it's not an easy fix. We need to work at it and look at it with glasses, if you need glasses, to get a clear vision of what the view is, and see how can we be brothers and sisters to each other.
I think something Andrea said earlier is really important too, listening our voices as much as the opposition is listening their voices, and engaging the media well. I know there are a lot of programs of young people like the IJPC program, Yes, United We Dream, that are training young people to tell their stories, to lift them up, because that is powerful to hear someone's personal story. And I was thinking in Cincinnati on March 12th, we're having a rally for hope, Stop Separating Families. And this is a rally that's been planned by various interfaith groups from different aspects of the issue to come together and remind us that we need to keep working together on this issue. We can't give up.
I think it's important to remember too that, I think the more recent polls show that most Americans now really are supporting immigration reform, and so it seems like the word is getting out, and people are becoming aware of the complexities of this issue, and the situations that the immigrants are in, what's pushing them into the country, and that many of them are refugees and do need asylum. But it seems like more and more of the American people want to embrace the immigrants and to look at the policy, certainly, and find a livable solution. So the gridlock is really frustrating for everyone.
All right. Let's see. And the last few things, again, we've touched on a couple of things. The Obama administration, well, you asked this also about the Supreme Court ruling, I guess in June is coming, right, on the 2014 effort, the proposal that the Obama administration had made to expand both DACA and then create this new program called DAPA, the parental program. How important is this? It would legalize, as I understand, or allow about 5 million undocumented immigrants to stay and allowed to work legally. The Supreme Court, I believe, is hearing this or supposed to decide in June. Maybe you can fill us in on the details and how closely this is being watched.
Being watched very closely. I think one of the things that is another moral question is the whole issue that if President Obama is not allowed to bring a Supreme Court justice nominee forward and have that person seated, whether that happens before DAPA is decided on or ruled on. But what it does, by the fact that they cannot have a full Supreme Court seated, it injures, it hurts the people who are waiting on the other side for those decisions. And if there's a tie, then it goes back to the most recent court decision. And we need, this is urgent. I think the whole immigration law, it's going to take a long time to get all of that fixed. But meeting the needs of these people at the border today is what's urgent. And I think with all hope that DAPA gets passed, then we'll be able to help those 5 million and then move forward in the process.
Passing DAPA is of utmost importance right now. And if you look to the values of our faith, it is just wrong to separate families or to keep families in the fear of separation. Some of the families that I serve at our Catholic parish in Cincinnati, the parents have told me, well, I hear about this DAPA thing. That might be my only hope to be legalized in this country.
And the legal issue underlying this is the power to take executive action, which almost every president has done since President Eisenhower. After amnesty, as I mentioned before, only like one adult in the family, everybody had to file their own petition. So the spouse and children were not allowed to be here. But if they were already in the United States, they could apply for something that was called family unity, which was executive action. So again, that preserves family unity. They could stay together. The kids could go on to high school. They could get a social security card. They could work when they came of age and then get in line when the number came up for the visa petition. So the system is very onerous, but we have always had the ameliorative effect of executive action, again, to preserve family unity.
All right. I'm going to turn to my colleagues. Anything else, Jan, that you think we have not asked me to ask? I think I had a few backup questions about the violence of driving people to this country. We've talked about that. I had a question about educating young people about immigration. What are you doing about parochial schools and Catholic universities? We talked about that a little bit, if there's anything more detailed.
Yeah. Well, I could say, I know for my congregation, and I'm sure it's across the board in all of our congregations, sisters have been presenters at workshops on elementary school level, high school level, upper ed, workshops in adult education programs in parishes. And I think, we have an obligation, and I think we do it well. Most congregations were based on being educators. And that is something that we all do quite well. So I think it's happening and continuing to happening. And I almost want to liken it to like train the trainers. So just what was said a few moments ago, the young people that are now becoming voices for the voiceless is very encouraging. And we see them coming out to these rallies and to these meetings with us. And I think that's how it will happen. It's one building block at a time.
And some of these young people who have been in this country from, a very early age and have grown up here and been educated here, their classmates, you don't want them to go. They consider themselves Americans. There's one young woman that was in our YES program that she didn't even find out that she was not an American citizen until she was ready to apply for college. Her parents had kept it from her, thinking that would keep her safe. She just thought that they were overprotective and had some weird rules about what they weren't allowed to talk about in their families, but had no idea that she was an undocumented immigrant. And the first time she tried to tell her story in front of an audience was at our mother house. It was kind of a practice session for her, and she broke down in tears, and people had to come on either side of her and physically hold her up and give her some strength to help her tell the story, because all her dreams were shattered. And she's surrounded by, her peers and her friends that considered her part of their class, and, as an American, as much of an American as they are. And, just the injustice of that kind of thing is heartbreaking and shameful. And again, why would we want to send someone like this out of our country?
I have two examples I'd like to give of some of the youth in the Arise communities that are making a difference for the common good. Some of them are DACA, but other ones are actually citizens, and their parents are hoping for the DAPA to be able to be passed. But recently, one of the young high schooler and a young staff who is a DACA, and an older staff member went to the United Nations to make a presentation with the Religions of the Sacred Heart at their NGO to be able to talk about popular education, which is one of the ways that the education of the people in Arise happens. They have the gifts. They have their skills themselves. We don't have all the answers to give to them, but they have it themselves. Let's continue to teach in that way. The other group of students, all high schoolers, they were in a leadership training program this summer, and they came together around a strange odor in the community. There happens to be a wastewater treatment plant about a block and a half from where our offices are. And it's sewer, and you smell it almost every day. And the plant has been there for over 60 years, and it's starting to malfunction. And the kids have taken it on. They have presented to the EPA. They have presented to the Texas Quality Environmental Committee, and they're making the presentations themselves. And they call in every day that there's an odor nuisance. They call in and say, here's how bad it is. And they're getting responses back from both the EPA and the similar organization in Texas to be able to make that change for their community. A lot of people it's 95% immigrants who live in that community. So they're making a difference at the local level.
I want to bring up an interesting aspect of education that's having to go on right now in our immigrant communities. Because of the raids that happened earlier in January, there was a bit of fear rising in our communities. So a lot of us are doing Know Your Rights training to help immigrants understand what their rights are if ICE comes to their door. And the principal of our Catholic school called me and said, Sister Tracy, what do I do if one of my students goes home and their parents aren't there? I'm reading about making a plan for deportation. Do I have to talk to my kindergartners about making a plan with their parents in case they're deported? So schools are having to figure out how to serve their immigrant students in the best way without scaring them, but figuring out how to educate them on that.
In Chicago, there's a big push to get people registered to vote in high schools and in colleges, and teaching English as doing English class preparation for permanent residents who are eligible to apply for citizenship and helping them file their citizenship applications. So a lot is perking during this election year.
All right, anything that we did not ask you that you wanted to be able, this is the famous wrap-up question that most journalists ask at the end of their interviews. In your media training, you probably got this. They always sort of throw it open to you. Is there something that we should have asked that didn't, or we didn't, or something you want to make a point of that we didn't touch
on? Well, I mean, I think you're hearing from all of us that certainly, comprehensive immigration reform needs to happen. We think there absolutely is a place at the table for religious women, and not only the Catholic-based community, but for all faith communities. All of us have seen how the interfaith piece works, and that our networks can help expand their networks. So I think that's what you're hearing, and it is a path to full citizenship, comprehensive immigration reform.
We need to believe that we can do this together. We need to keep, even though it's feeling like a long, slow fight, we need to continue to raise hope and work together collectively to bring comprehensive immigration reform to our nation.
And part of that is really allowing people to get on a path to citizenship. We've talked about TPS, we've talked about DACA and DAPA, but that's a holding pattern. You're flying around O'Hare Airport, waiting to land, waiting to go somewhere. But these are just stopgap measures, and I don't want to sound like a wet blanket, but DAPA and DACA are just another Band-Aid on the wound. What we need is to cauterize the wound, clean it out, stitch it together, heal it up, and get people on the right track. There's a section of the law, Section 249, that's called registry. It's been in the law since the early 50s, where people who have been here since 1924, 1956, and 1972 have been here, have not been criminals, or pay their taxes. They can apply for permanent residence status without having to have a family sponsor or an employer sponsor. So this is part of the culture of our immigration law. And the first law was that the guys who made the rules, they said, if you're here 2 years, you can be a citizen. But that was only free white person. So that excluded everybody in this group. But anyway, like I say, immigration laws change. And if we have the political will, if we have the faith, and if we believe that we all share God's breath, and that's what makes us our community, that we can be brothers and sisters and breathe free and clear and enjoy the freedom and become who God has called us to be.
From a faith and moral perspective, this is really clear.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Without comprehensive immigration reform, we are not respecting the human dignity of our brothers and sisters. So from the faith perspective, it's clear.